And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker to you, Carrie B. Kisker. Dr. Carrie B. Kisker is president of Kisker Education Consulting in Los Angeles, California. Drawing from her own and others' research, she regularly speaks, writes, and consults with college leaders on issues related to entrepreneurship and innovation, program and policy development, strategic planning and accountability, civic learning, and democratic engagement. In addition to her consulting work, Dr. Kisker runs the Center for the Study of Community Colleges, a nonprofit organization that engages in and supports research related to community college leadership, practice, and policy. Working through the center and with funding from several philanthropic foundations, Dr. Kisker has conducted national investigations of transfer and articulation reform, civic learning and democratic engagement, and deliberative practices in community colleges. She is currently collaborating with the Belk Center for Community College Leadership and Research and ICPSR at the University of Michigan to create a national community college data hub, which will expand access to and utilization of community college data sets for institutional improvement and secondary analysis. Dr. Kisker is the author of the 6th and 7th editions of the American Community College, written with Arthur M. Cohen and Florence B. Brower, the 2nd and 3rd editions of The Shaping of American Higher Education, Emergence and Growth of the Contemporary System with Arthur M. Cohen, and Creating Entrepreneurial Community Colleges, a Design Thinking Approach. Dr. Kisker holds a BA in Psychology and Education from Dartmouth College and an MA and PhD in Higher Education from the University of California, Los Angeles. Dr. Kisker's keynote speech is titled, "We Are All Guardians, Teaching, Learning, and Leading as Mission Protection." Please join me in welcoming Carrie to this year's conference.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, NISOD. Thank you. Hello. All right. Happy Memorial Day. I am honored to be here. Thank you, Chris, and the entire NISOD team for inviting me to be with you today. What an interesting time it is to be working in higher education, huh? For the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey, an odyssey, if you will. And just like in Homer's Odyssey, together we're going to visit some pretty dark and discouraging places, and I'm going to ask you to sit with me in that discomfort for just a little while, okay? But I also don't want anyone running for the doors halfway through, writing reviews saying that this is the worst keynote speech you've ever heard. So I will promise you that ultimately the point of this talk is to emerge together from the darkness with an agreement on what we can all do to weather this current storm and to protect our institutions and our students from further harm, okay? So I'm basically hoping that if I promise you a little bit of hope and a couple tangible ideas at the end of this speech, that you will come on this somewhat distressing journey with me. Do we have a deal? We're in this? Okay, fantastic. So for a few years now, I've been giving some version of a speech in which I've been talking about the ways that community colleges, and indeed all of higher education, have come under attack from forces both within and beyond the academy. And I've been given this speech for years before the events of the last 5 months or so. And my task, at least as I saw it, was to open people's eyes to the ways that these things are happening to our system and to try to convince you that something needs to be done to protect and to preserve the values on which our system stands. Now, I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I don't think I need to do much convincing anymore, right? We all know that even before the last election, higher education was operating in one of the most challenging times in history. Community colleges in particularly have been doing so as we've been tasked with educating the most marginalized and vulnerable populations with per FTE appropriations that are not only the lowest among institutions of higher education, but that have been decreasing steadily for at least 40 years. Add to that competition for a decreasing number of high school graduates, vague executive orders and gag order legislation, the elimination of funding for research and student support programs, threats to international students, to Pell Grants, and to borrowing limits, and everything else that has happened over the past 5 months. And I think it's safe to say that we found ourselves in a bit of a pickle. And by pickle, of course, I mean existential crisis. So if this is how our institutions are doing, how our students and our system are doing at the moment, I want to take a minute to just get a sense of how we in this room are doing. So if you're able, raise your right hand if you worry for the future of our colleges and for the students who attend them. Now raise your left hand if you're nervous like I am to open your phone in the mornings to see what the next horrendous headline is going to look like, right? Okay. And if you are able, please stand if you just feel exhausted and worn down by all that's happening. If you just feel done sometimes. Yeah, I think it's safe to say we're in this pretty deep, but before you sit down, take a look around and notice that we are not alone in our fatigue, in our worry, in our fear, right? We are in this together. Thank you for indulging me in that. You may have a seat now. I think it's important to remember that we're in this together. And in order to fight our malaise, our fear, our exhaustion, I would like to start by agreeing on what we're trying to preserve. And then we'll move on to how we can work together to do that. All right? So I want to start by saying that the American system of higher education has long been the envy of the world, right? And I think this is primarily for two reasons. And the first is the uniquely American institution, the community college. Community colleges, as you all know, not only provide access to our system, but they promote mobility within that system. That is, in essence, the social role of the community college, to promote mobility among vulnerable and disenfranchised groups and to give them a chance to participate equally and fully in the American dream. Community colleges, as each of you knows, have also been on the forefront, the front lines of the equity revolution. And many of the programs and practices that you have all implemented to further diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging have been adopted at all different types of institutions across our system, right? Now, of course, we know that this hasn't always made everybody happy, and we will come back to that. But a lot of what we have achieved as educators comes from the work that you all have done in community college and broadly accessible institutions. The other superpower, of course, to our system is our commitment to high-quality research, education, and innovation, which has not only inspired universities across the globe, but it's led to all kinds of scientific, medical, and other breakthroughs. And I'm not going to belabor this point, but anyone who knows their history of higher education knows that although we've had plenty of private funding for research over the past 400 or so years our system has been around, the main driver, the primary driver of research and innovation in American universities has been the US government. And I hope that continues. Now, I would argue that these superpowers are made possible by 5 foundational pillars that undergird all of American higher education. And ultimately, today, every single one of these 5 pillars is under attack. So let's talk about them for a minute. The first pillar is institutional autonomy, the right of colleges and universities to manage their own affairs, to craft mission statements, to make programmatic decisions, and so forth. The notion of institutional autonomy has been tested in the courts numerous times over the past 400 years or so, and it has been upheld every single time in order to protect institutions from the heavy hand of government. At its core, institutional autonomy is nothing less than a protection against autocracy. And key to institutional autonomy is the right to self-governance through peer review, Yet in the past 5 months, and I would argue much longer than that, we have seen all kinds of attacks on institutional autonomy. And I'm going to just hope for a minute that this room is not so big that if I ask you to shout out a way that we've seen institutional autonomy be attacked, that the rest of us can hear it. So don't make me stand up here in silence, guys. How have you seen institutional autonomy be attacked in the recent months and years? Sorry? In Florida, that's a great idea. Florida has led, in many ways, the attacks on institutional autonomy. In North Carolina as well, institutions must now change accreditors every single cycle, right? Which essentially kneecaps the process. And we've seen further threats to accreditation by attempts or threats to decertify them. What other ways have we seen? Louder. That's right, absolutely, absolutely. Defunding of research, of student support programs, of IMLs, all kinds of things. What else? Anti-DEI legislation and other gag order legislation, that's right. Let's go back to Florida for a second. In Florida, faculty no longer have the sole or even final responsibility for hiring, firing, and promoting their peers, right? And I'll just name one other thing. The US Department of Education may not be long for this world, but one thing that would be good about it going away is the fact that its Office of Civil Rights has now been weaponized to punish those institutions and those faculty administrators who don't toe the administration's line. All of these are threats to institutional autonomy and the ways that institutions in our system have policed and governed themselves over the years. So I think it's safe to say that this pillar of institutional autonomy is a little vulnerable right now. The second pillar is academic freedom, which is directly responsible for Americans' dominance in the research enterprise. And as all of you know, it's also critical to the development of students' ability to think critically and creatively in the classroom, right? Academic freedom is being threatened in two primary ways today. First is by the government's revocation of funding for research grants and politically driven rules about what may be funded now or in the future. But in addition, because academic freedom is protected largely by tenure, this pillar is also being eroded by forces within academe, right? We know that many states have rolled back tenure protections, but as I have argued, a frontal assault on tenure may not even be necessary to do away with it, right? Because more and more of our institutions are simply replacing retiring tenured professors with contingent appointments. In the case of this pillar, the damage we are doing to ourselves rivals that might be done by DOJ and other politically motivated actors. Now, I think it's fair for those of us in this room to question the relevance of tenure to community colleges where nationally only about 11% of faculty have tenure or are on the tenure track. But Irene Mulvey, who is the former head of AAUP, has argued that tenure is not for the individual. Tenure exists to protect academic freedom, which itself is essential to democracy. She's gone on to say that if you don't have academic freedom, you end up in an authoritarian state where the government gets to tell you what is true and what you can't learn. Which leads us to the third pillar on which our system rests: freedom of expression and promotion of critical thought. Now, in lots of ways, this is closely related to academic freedom, right? But it extends the right to free speech to students, to administrators, and to others who don't have tenure protections. Now, all of us know the importance of free expression in the classroom, right? And to the development of students' social, emotional, and cognitive learning. Yet even this has come under attack, as we've all seen in recent months and years, as legislators and others have criticized everything from certain pedagogical practices to student activism to general education requirements that they think teach our students what to think, not how to think. Last year, PEN America presciently wrote that the impact of these bills and laws has a clear chilling effect on free expression in the classroom. If educators who raise issues related to race or gender or history face serious financial, legal, or reputational consequences, fear will squelch free expression. Now let's be honest. How many of you are currently feeling a little bit of that chilling effect? Yeah. And how many of you have already, and there's no shame in this, but how many of you have already modified to some extent what or how you teach out of fear of reprisal? It's a real thing. It's a real thing. The fourth pillar relates to the promotion of access and equitable support and a commitment to enabling social mobility for historically underserved and marginalized groups. Now, admittedly, this has not always been a foundational pillar of American higher education. A commitment to egalitarianism only really became a system priority about 100 years ago when community colleges entered the scene, right? And the notion of equity as something more than equality of opportunity only really began to hit the national consciousness in the last few decades, some would say last few years. Nonetheless, I would argue that both of these ideas have become foundational to who we are and to who we strive to be as educators, especially in our community colleges. Unfortunately, as we all know, this commitment to access and equity is the very reason why so many politicians and pundits and others are motivated to attack higher education. Right? To their thinking, any program or institution that enables social mobility for marginalized groups threatens the survival of a racialized caste system that they currently benefit from. And therefore, those programs and institutions must be discredited or attacked. The fifth and final pillar is a commitment to the public good. Community colleges, frankly, are usually the best at making the case for their public good mission, right? Because we can speak to all the work we do related to community service or to workforce development and so on. But the reality is that every single public or nonprofit institution of higher education in this country works intentionally to develop students as citizens and as productive members of society, right? And yet, while the public good mission is rarely attacked directly, it too is eroding because we are now living in a societal context that is increasingly hostile to the very idea of American higher education. We've all seen headlines like these, right? And just to hammer home the idea that none of this is particularly new in the last 5 months, I think I collected this sample in late 2023. You also are probably familiar with statistics like these, that 61% of Americans, including 52% of Democrats and 73% of Republicans, believe that higher education is heading in the wrong direction. Both groups cite rising tuition and other costs as the main source of their discontent, but Republicans in particular also cite the so-called liberal indoctrination theory, right? The worry that most college professors teach liberal propaganda as a major reason for their distrust in the system. The bottom line is that a great many Americans do not believe that higher education is working for the public good, or they've never been exposed to the ways we seek to do this. And as a result, they question the benefits of the system. And I should point out that while much of the distrust and the skepticism that is aimed at higher education today is often pointed toward the most elite and expensive and selective institutions, the ones it hurts the most are those that educate students on the margins, right? Those like community colleges who educate and train the students who are most likely to be dissuaded from attending college at all. So if this is what a healthy system of higher education looks like, with all 5 foundational pillars intact, this is what it's going to be if we do not begin to work together to preserve and protect the fundamental values on which our system rests And if the system looks like this, if institutions cannot make their own decisions about what to teach and how to teach it, if academic freedom becomes a relic of the past and students, faculty, and staff no longer feel safe expressing their beliefs or their opinions, if international students or lower income students or part-time students can no longer afford to attend higher education, and if we're prevented from providing with the type of equitable support they need to succeed, if we lose completely the public trust in our mission, what does that mean for our students? What does that look like for our institutions or society? Okay, I'm just checking in now. We're solidly in Homer's underworld at the moment. You guys doing okay? All right, let's move toward the light. But the reason I've taken you on this really dark and depressing conversation is to help you viscerally understand what is currently at stake. And hopefully to convince you that despite our fatigue, despite our fear, despite our worries about our systems and our students, despite all of the reasons we may have to stay silent in this moment, we need to work together to become guardians of our institutional missions and the fundamental values that we as educators hold dear. So what does it mean to be a guardian? In my mind, protecting and preserving our mission comes down to three primary categories of action: connection, resistance, and innovation. All of these approaches can be accomplished by faculty, administrators, students, staff, and others, and they're not mutually exclusive. If you feel safe and supported, you can work on all three fronts all at the same time, or you can pick and choose where you feel most comfortable. So let's start with connection. And just to give you a little break from my voice for the moment, I want to play a clip from a recent episode of my podcast, Spotlight on Community Colleges, in which Dr. Jeremy Young talks about the importance of connection and collaboration in responding to anti-DEI legislation.
People sometimes ask me, are these attacks on higher education unprecedented? What I say is, here is what is unprecedented. There is an unprecedented opportunity for higher education to come together and repel this onslaught. And we're going to have to do that because the people attacking higher education are not going to let up. They're not going to back down. They're not going to give up or go away. Higher education is not historically good at working together across, within institutions, across institution types on anything. And yet this is a totalizing attack on the entire sector that really lends itself to a concerted and collaborative response. This is the thing about censorship. This is how censorship works. It is designed to isolate you. It is designed to make you feel as though there is no one else in the entire world who is standing with you, who is facing the same things you are facing, because you're so afraid to speak or even think about what you're experiencing that you can't reach out and find community. And what I would want to impress upon people in that situation is that there is a community out there. There is an army of us all over the country who are fighting for the right to speak, for the freedom to learn, for the ability to support our vulnerable populations on our campuses, to live up to the missions of our institutions.
I played this clip for you, A, because I don't think I could say it any better, but also because silence, when you are under attack, often looks and feels like submission, right? But standing alone against people whose ideas would tear down the work you believe in, causing untold harm to those who benefit from it, can be dangerous, right? Which is why the first thing we need to do to protect and preserve the higher education mission is to form connections and alliances across your campuses, across your state or region, across sectors. And we're beginning to see some of this right now, right? So for example, faculty in the Big Ten have started forming alliances. We've also seen some among regional associations or our national advocacy organizations. As Jeremy said, you are not alone in this. And there is an army of people and organizations who would gladly welcome you into their ranks to share your experiences, to act collectively, and to protect the values that you share in ways that do not put you as an individual or as an individual campus in jeopardy. Which leads us to resistance. For many of us, this is our natural inclination when we feel under attack, right? We believe in the work we do. We believe in our system and our institution and our students, and we want to protect them in any way possible. And yet we often don't know how to do this productively, right? And we often, in particular, don't know how to do this without calling negative attention to ourselves or our institutions or running afoul of state or national regulations. So the best advice I can give about how to resist comes from Timothy Snyder's little book called On Tyranny. Has anyone seen this book? Yeah, I suggest all of us read it, and fast. But the first rule in On Tyranny, Snyder believes, is don't obey in advance. Right? Now, some of us are already working in states that have banned certain DEI practices and procedures, for example, but many of us are not. Yet we see all kinds of colleges across this country seeking to interpret executive orders or making changes ahead of time so that they don't attract the ire of the administration. But these acts of anticipatory obedience do nothing but give positive feedback to those in power and ultimately weaken the system's ability to stand for what it believes in. The second rule on tyranny is defend institutions. Snyder writes, "We tend to assume that institutions will automatically maintain themselves against even the most direct attack. But institutions do not protect themselves. They fall," he says, "one after another unless each is defended from the beginning. So choose an institution you care about and take its side." So let's talk specifics for a minute, shall we? If you're a faculty member, you resist by continuing to incorporate high-impact pedagogical practices and assignments that connect to students' identities and that draw upon students' lived experiences. This is not DEI, this is simply a best practice for facilitating learning and connecting to disciplinary ideas for all students. Similarly, if you're a professor or you work in student services, you engage in resistance by continuing to provide individualized and culturally appropriate support to meet students where they are, and to make sure that every single student who walks through your doors feels welcome and seen and as if they belong and as if they can succeed. If you're a college president and you feel protected and able to do so, you can sign on to letters such as that written by the American Council on Education or the American Association of Colleges and Universities that caution about federal overreach in attempts to root out anti-Semitism or to ban DEI programs and practices. But maybe you're a college president or administrator who doesn't feel safe or supported into signing on to such letters. That is okay, that's fine. You can engage in resistance by establishing policies and cultivating a culture of respect and innovation on campus, so it is clear that under your leadership, every single student, faculty, staff, and other person on campus is safe and will be supported. If you're a trustee, you might consider joining the American Governing Board's Guardians Initiative, which provides a toolkit for college and university trustees to explain the value of the higher education enterprise, including its public good mission, and hopefully reclaim some of the public trust. By the way, you don't need to be an AGB member to take advantage of these resources. They're free and on their website. But as the initiative points out, there is a clear role for trustees in helping to shape the public perceptions of our institutions. And finally, if you're a student, you and your peers can help to preserve higher education's fundamental values by speaking out about your experiences in college and how you felt supported in your educational journey. Maybe you can talk about how a TRIO or Puente or a MOJA program helped you along the way. Or maybe you can talk about how a faculty member or administrator who looks like you or who came from your community showed you that your dream was possible. As Dr. George Boggs has said, students can be the secret weapons in our collective resistance, and I know that we can all do a better job at being megaphones for their voices and their experiences. Now, the most important thing to keep in mind about resistance is that it can be done quietly, and it can be done publicly and emphatically. The ways that each of you choose to resist will be dependent in large part upon your own beliefs, but also on the position of privilege that you currently inhabit, and how you think about the risks and rewards of being vocal and out in support of our institutions at the moment. Now, I will say, there is one downside to this particular approach to mission protection, and that is when we go into resistance mode, we tend to see things in a very black and white way, right? Whoever is attacking us must be wrong, and whatever they are attacking, whatever we've been doing is 100% right. Have you guys felt that at all? A little bit, yeah? Have you worried that if you've given even an inch or admitted that there may be even a kernel of truth to a critique that you're going to lose the whole argument? Yeah, I mean, I think it's really natural, frankly. I've felt that way. But unfortunately, resisting in this manner has two fundamental flaws. And the first is that it closes down any productive dialogue you may have with someone who doesn't believe exactly as you do, or who doesn't have exactly the same experiences and perspectives. And when we shut down dialogue with people who are in a position of power, we run the risk of being punished, right? And second, resisting in a black and white way overlooks the fundamental truth that we all work in an imperfect system, comprised of imperfect institutions run by imperfect people. That's right. Yes, our higher education system may be the best in the world, but that does not mean that we don't make mistakes. And it certainly doesn't mean that we can't do better. Which leads us to our final approach to mission protection, innovation. As I alluded earlier, when we feel under attack, we have a tendency to circle the wagons, right, to protect whatever already exists. But intellectually, we also know that some of the most innovative changes are born out of crisis, right? So if we can train ourselves to appreciate and notice the opportunity in the moment, yes, protect our fundamental mission and values, but at the same time innovate how we enact those values, I think we may be able to capitalize on some of the uncertainty of the moment and maybe make some innovative and exciting changes, potentially even some necessary changes. In my work with community colleges, I often guide teams of faculty and administrators, sometimes trustees, through the design thinking approach to mission-oriented change, which is essentially just design thinking geared specifically to the community college sector. The first step in this approach is asking, what is, right? Basically embarking on an honest assessment of various stakeholders' needs, both met and unmet, as well as various external conditions. And the success of everything that comes later in the innovation process, from ideating potential solutions to iteratively testing those in the real world, depends on how thorough we are in asking what is. One of the ways groups can work to define what is to agree upon design criteria, basically values or ideas that are so central to what we believe or to what we're trying to accomplish that we will not even consider any solution that potentially jeopardizes them. But in defining design criteria, we're also committing ourselves to being open to new ways of accomplishing our objectives, right? In other words, we're holding our mission and our values sacred, but we're also forcing ourselves not to give added weight to solutions just because we've done them before. I'm going to give you an example, and I'm going to take a risk and touch a third rail here for a minute. We all know that diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and practices have been banned in many states and are under attack everywhere else, right? And as educators, we may believe strongly in the notions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But we clearly have to recognize that many others see our efforts in this area as exclusionary or promoting one group over another. In design thinking terms, the needs of some stakeholders are not being met by our current approach. And if we're being totally honest here, I think we could admit that some approaches to DEI have worked better than others, and frankly, none of them has been a panacea to inequity. And if we can accept these hard truths, then we become open to new ideas about how we can equitably support students in ways that may not result in as much of an us versus them, I'm going to go down with this ship type situation, right? One innovative approach I like a lot comes from a dean of allied health at Wayne County Community College District in Detroit. Do we have any Wayne County people here today? All right, well, good. They don't know I'm talking about them. But the dean of allied health is a man named Mr. Mark McGaffick. And like many of us, Mark has seen the DEI writing on the wall and has come up with a slightly different way of talking about how Wayne County's allied health staff support their students. Mark's framework is called CARE, Cultural Awareness, Advocacy, Respect, and Empowerment. Essentially, Mark points out that when a patient comes into a medical clinic, it would be illegal to either offer or deny them access to various treatments based on their race, their ethnicity, their gender identity, that sort of thing, right? It would be discriminatory, and I think we can all agree it would be wrong. However, because some diseases or conditions are more likely to affect certain races or ethnicities, or may affect them differently, or, for example, women may respond differently to some treatments than men, the standard of care for the same condition varies depending on who the patient is, right? We adjust the dose, or we recommend a different treatment approach based on various sociocultural, physical, and other factors. Now, we may end up tweaking that approach over time, but as Mark points out, we are much more likely to be able to provide top-notch care if we are A, aware of how that patient's identity may affect treatment options, if we know how to advocate for the correct treatment for that individual, if we show respect for the patient and all of the various issues that they may be contending with in their life, and if we empower that patient to participate in decisions about their recovery and their treatment options so they have a best likelihood of making that full recovery. In other words, in medicine, we have accepted the notion that we must provide equitable and appropriate care to all patients, not because they are a part of a certain demographic group, but because their membership in that group informs best practices for their care. So Mark asked, if this approach to treating patients works so well in medicine, might it also have some lessons for how we teach and support students in higher education? Can we level up our approach to providing access and equitable support in ways that both neutralize the weaponization of certain words and phrases and preserve our ability to provide top-notch education and training and support for all students? I think we can do this, and I think there are untold numbers of other innovations that could come from this current crisis if we can force ourselves force ourselves to focus on the fundamental values that we want to preserve, but leave ourselves open to new ways and different ways of accomplishing them. Maybe you've seen this quote. This comes from former US Army General Eric Shinseki, who once said, "If you don't like change, you'll like irrelevance even less." Right? Change is coming, and we can either let others dictate what is going to change and how it's going to change, or we can choose to be innovators and entrepreneurs who are consistently seeking new ways of enacting the values of the higher education enterprise. So at the end of the day, to be a guardian of the higher education mission, of the community college mission, we need to identify the places where we must be absolutely 100% inflexible, where we have to stick to our principles no matter what. But we also need to be aware of the areas where we can bend, where we maybe need to step back and listen and learn, and where we need to innovate. Ultimately, protecting the mission and the social role of our institutions boils down to what I like to call the Hippocratic Oath for the academic profession. We all know the first rule of the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm. That's right. In other words, do not act in ways that contribute to the erosion of higher education's bedrock values. Second, do what you can, when you can, to protect and preserve the pillars upon which our system stands, including institutional autonomy, academic freedom, free expression, equitable access and support, and finally, a commitment to the public good. And finally, let's work together. Just as doctors and nurses and PAs and medical assistants all work as a team, those of us in academia need to collaborate as well. Each one of us performs a necessary and important role in higher education, and as we connect, as we resist, and as we innovate, we need to remember that we will be far more effective working together than we would be if we were standing alone. So I want to thank you, Chris, for inviting me to be here with you today. I want to thank all of you for the energy that you're bringing to this conference and to your work that you do every day with students and communities in ways that lead to a more just, prosperous, and equitable society. We are all guardians, and together we can work to preserve the missions and the social roles of our institutions, and more importantly, we can reestablish trust in this higher education enterprise that we believe in so strongly. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Carrie. I think you've given us all a lot to think about. Appreciate that. All right, we have, it looks like probably 8 minutes or so, well, yeah, about 8 minutes that we can take some questions. And so we have a couple of microphones that are going to be roving for anyone who would like to ask questions. So probably the easiest thing is if you could either raise your hand, stand up, so that our microphone folks can see you. And our people with the microphones, you'll see Jim raising his hand in the back, and you see Nathan raising his hand in the back. It looks like, do we have anyone that's raising their hand yet? Yes, here in the center. Do you see him, Nathan?
Hello, hello. Richard Bazil with Dallas College. I want to know, what do you think we should be doing with foreign institutions?
With foreign institutions or foreign students or both?
Both.
I don't know that I have given a lot of thought to the institutions part of this, but we're adapting hour by hour, I think, in terms of what we need to be doing for our international students. I think they are very appreciative of messages of support, of listening to what their needs are, to funds that may be set aside to help them in whatever ways. But unfortunately, we're in this moment where things are changing very rapidly, and a lot is changing that we don't have a lot of control over. So I don't know that I have a direct answer for you right now, other than please let them know that you are aware that they may be in crisis and that you are actively working to think about what you can do both today to help them and then how we can move forward in the future under any number of potential scenarios. You know, it could be that it's all been a scare and every international student in this country is going to be safe and welcomed onto campuses in the fall, and it might be the absolute opposite of that. And so we need to be preparing for a variety of situations and doing what we can to reach out to those students and support them. In terms of working with international institutions, I think that's a bigger question, and I can put some thought into that and get back to you. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for a really, really engaging and interesting conversation and presentation. I'm Kamisha Broussard from Houston Community College, and my question is somewhat two-part. We know that our country is kind of founded on protests. We have a history of protests. How do you see our current environment as being any different from what has happened in the past?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you're right. I think student activism and underlying that, giving our students space to figure out their opinions and their beliefs and to express them, even if they're not always fully formed, right? Or if they're maybe more emphatic than they could be later in life. That has been a fundamental truth of American higher education. We have a long history of supporting that. And we also have a long history of not doing that well. And I think both of those parallel to our current moment. We have been absolutely imperfect in how we both support freedom of expression and activism on our campuses, and in how we draw the line and draw boundaries and say, this is too much. I think the big difference that I've seen over the last 16 months or so, since October 7th, is that for the first time, the issues that many of our students and faculty and staff have been protesting on our college campuses, we've often aimed our ire at administrators on campus before, but they're sort of this nameless, faceless, protected class. And oftentimes we've been upset about things that have been happening globally. We've been protesting the draft, right, in the early 70s and all kinds of stuff. For the first time, there's been a constituency on our campuses that all of the anger and resentment was aimed toward them, fairly or not, or they felt that it was aimed toward them. And so it really ripped apart many student bodies and many faculty bodies as well. And I think we didn't know how to handle that really well. And I think we're still figuring out how to protect free speech and to encourage the critical and creative thinking and care about our environment and our world and our people that is happening on college campuses, and also protect those on our campuses that don't feel the same way or who may feel threatened in that. So that is a work in progress, and it is not helped, I think, by the weaponization of our mistakes against us. I think we have to acknowledge that we have made mistakes at times, but those have been and are being weaponized in ways that I think are beyond punishing our mistakes and more about tearing down those 5 foundational pillars. So we have to be aware of when we're fighting back, what are we fighting for, and what are we trying to protect, and it's nuanced and difficult.
Appreciate your speech. One of the proposed solutions, air quote, for DEI is MEI. And I was wondering if I could get your thoughts on MEI.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear.
MEI is oftentimes portrayed as a solution, air quotes, to DEI. And I was wondering if I could get your thoughts on
MDI
that.
stands for what exactly?
MEI, the Tesla CEO, he who shall not be named, has proposed that as a solution for his organizations. Merit, excellence, and intelligence meant to replace DEI.
Boy, you're really trying to get me canceled today, aren't you?
I'll just take this. Yeah.
Listen, those are all good things in some circumstances, right? Like, I don't want to argue against merit, but I think we have to acknowledge that merit and intelligence and words like that have been designed to apply to a specific population historically, and they have been used to exclude others. And when I hear MDI, I think it goes back to the point I made earlier about trying to preserve a racialized caste system because it benefits certain groups. And I think MDI would have that same effect. And so, with all respect to he who shall not be named, I'll stick with DEI.
All right, one last question.
Is that better? Haha. My name's Tina Moat. I'm from Triton College outside Chicago. I know that there's been alliances among the Big Ten schools to pull together. Have you heard any murmurs about community colleges forming an alliance?
I think this was the first step toward doing that. I think it has to happen. So maybe you could say your name and your affiliation again and people can come talk to you. It is critical. It's critical. We can't stand alone against this. We have to stand in solidarity with one another. And those of us in safer, quote unquote, states need to be allies more now than ever. So thank you for leading the charge on that.
All right. So thank you, Carrie, for those inspiring remarks. And also thank you to all of you for your questions. I think it's such an important conversation, and hope that that conversation will continue. Now, in a moment, I will present Carrie with the Sue Ann Davis Roosh Distinguished Lecturer Award. But first, I would like to take a moment to reflect upon the individual for whom the award was named, Dr. Sue Ann Davis Roosh. Sue Ann served as the first director of NISOD. She transformed NISOD into the premier organization supporting excellence in teaching, learning, and leadership at community colleges. Sue Ann's commitment to teaching excellence was unwavering. She understood that the heart of student success lies in the classroom, with dedicated faculty who are supported in their professional growth. Through NISOD's annual conference, publications, and professional development initiatives, she created platforms that elevated teaching practices and celebrated the achievements of community college educators. Her scholarly work continues to guide practices across our institutions. What distinguished Sue Ann's leadership was her remarkable ability to build bridges, connecting research to practice, linking faculty to resources, and fostering collaborations across institutions. As we continue Sue Ann's legacy through our work, we honor her belief that every student deserves exceptional teaching and every educator deserves recognition for their transformative impact in the classroom and beyond. So, Carrie, in recognition of your commitment to ensuring community college and student success, we're proud to present you with the Sue Ann Davis Roosh Distinguished Lecturer Award. All right, real quickly, those who were part of our Most Promising Places to Work in Community College Award recipients, if you wouldn't mind staying after for a brief moment so we can take the group picture. And we'll meet up here by this front table up here. All right, so to close out today's general session, I have a few reminders for you. Refreshments will be offered in the exhibit hall this afternoon at 2:45 to 3:15. Tomorrow's general session will begin at 8 a.m., bright and early in the grand ballroom right here. Our keynote speaker will be Dr. Mike Flores, Chancellor of Alamo Colleges. Also, don't forget to turn in your bingo cards by 8 a.m. to be eligible for the Beats headphones, or the Amazon Kindle that will be given away tomorrow at the end of the general session. Have a wonderful afternoon.